Somewhere in America right now, an employee is sitting through a workplace harassment training session. They're being told the rules. Respect your coworkers. Do not abuse your position. Do not create a hostile work environment. And if you break those rules, there will be consequences. And for most Americans, that is just part of life. If you do something at work, there is a process. There is exposure. There is accountability. There is the risk that your name, your actions, and your reputation could all be dragged into the light. But in Washington, the rules seem to work a little differently. Because when the people in power get accused, the process gets quieter. The doors close. The records disappear behind procedure. The excuses start flying, and the public is told not to look too closely. Now here is where it gets interesting. The political class that keeps screaming for transparency when it comes to everybody else suddenly becomes very protective of secrecy when the spotlight points back towards Congress. And when Republicans and Democrats, who can barely agree on what day it is, come together in a giant bipartisan vote to keep something buried, that ought to make every American stop and ask what exactly they do not want us to see. Because this is not a close call. This was not a close call. This was not one party acting alone. This was Washington protecting Washington. And in case you missed it, that should concern every single one of us. So did Congress just vote to hide its own sexual misconduct files while demanding transparency from everyone else? Remember, we fight for what's right because it's time to go right.
Somewhere in America right now, someone is sitting through the training. Rules on the wall, warnings in the air. Respect your coworkers. Do not abuse your power. Do not create a hostile place. And if you cross that line, there will be consequences. That is how it works for everyday people. There is a process. There is exposure. There is accountability. There is risk. Your name can be dragged into the lake. But in Washington, the rules get quieter. The doors close. The records disappear. The excuses start flying and the public is told, do not look too closely. When both sides come together to keep something buried, every American should ask, what are they hiding? Did Congress just vote to hide its own misconduct files while demanding transparency from everybody else? Go right with Peter Boykin! Truth matters. Transparency matters. In a constitutional republic, the people still have the right to know.
Did Congress just vote to hide its own sexual misconduct files while demanding transparency from everyone else? Welcome back to Go Right with myself, Peter Boykin, your constitutionalist for liberty. This is part of GoRightNews.com, where we step away from the political theater, we cut through the noise, and we look at what is really happening inside our constitutional republic. Because sometimes the biggest story in Washington is not the one they spend all day yelling about on television. Sometimes it's the one they quietly move off the stage while nobody is paying attention. And that is exactly what happened here. I know people are getting distracted with the Iran war and everything else, but in case you missed it, the U.S. House had a chance to force more transparency about sexual misconduct and harassment records involving members of our dear Congress. Instead, that House voted 357 to 65 to send Representative Nancy Mace's efforts to the House Ethics Committee, which is widely understood as a procedural graveyard for measures leadership does not want moving forward. Now that number matters. 357. It's not even a squeaker. Not a close call. Not just Democrats. Not just Republicans. Both sides helped bury it. And when you see that many members of Congress suddenly unite to keep something from public view, you have every right as an American citizen to stop and wonder what exactly they were so desperate to hide. Now let's break down what happened. Nancy Mace introduced a resolution aimed at preserving and releasing records tied to sexual harassment and misconduct investigations involving members of Congress and congressional staff. Her office said the measure would force public disclosure of those records. This could have been a real transparency moment. If Congress truly believed that powerful people should not be shielded from scrutiny, this was the time to prove it. Instead, lawmakers voted to send it away. That means the public does not get to see what was in those files. The institution keeps control. And Congress gets to tell itself that it handled the matter through the proper channels, while the American people are left staring at just another locked door. Now, the defenders of this move say releasing internal investigative files could discourage victims and witnesses from cooperating in future cases. But that was the argument pushed by the Ethics Committee side. But let's get clear, folks. Protecting real victims matter. It should matter. But Americans have heard this song before. Sometimes, quote, protecting the process becomes code for protecting the institution. Sometimes privacy becomes the shield used to keep powerful people insulated for consequences. And sometimes sensitivity becomes the excuse for making sure the public never learns how misconduct was handled behind closed doors. And that is where trust starts to die. Because this did not just happen in a vacuum. It happened in Congress. Congress has a history here. For years, there's been a public anger over how workplace misconduct complaints were handled under the Congressional Accountability Act system. Before reform, some settlements tied to congressional workplace claims could be paid through public funds rather than directly by lawmakers themselves. We're paying for their misconduct. Congress later changed parts of that system, but the history of secretive handling and taxpayer exposure never truly went away. That older history is exactly why people hear about this vote and think, here we go again. The same building, the same insiders, the same protective shell, the same political class telling the rest of America to live under rules they do not seem eager to apply to themselves. And here's the part that makes this even more explosive. This all unfolded while politicians on both sides have been loudly demanding transparency about the Epstein files. Oh, what about the Congress files? That is what makes the hypocrisy so hard to ignore. When the pressure is on to expose powerful people outside of Congress, Suddenly everybody wants sunlight. Everybody wants answers. Everybody wants documents released. Everybody wants the public to know the truth. But when the issue turns inward, when the records involve Congress itself, transparency suddenly becomes dangerous, complicated, and inconvenient. And that is why Nancy Mace responded the way she did after the vote, pointing out that some of the same voices demanding the release of the Epstein-related records had just voted to bury the sexual harassment files of members of Congress. Newsweek even reported that direct criticism after the House vote. And that is the whole rotten pattern in one sentence. Release the files when it damages outsiders. Hide the files when it damages insiders. Demand sunlight when it helps your narrative. Pull the blind shut when the light hits your own institution. And again, look at that number. 357 to 65. That's not just a few bad apples. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a giant bipartisan shield wall. That is the political class circling the wagons around itself. Now, why does this matter beyond Washington? Now, some people will hear this and say, well, this is just Washington being Washington. Or, people nowadays go, well, that's just politics. No. It's bigger than that. Because the culture of accountability inside the federal government does not stay in Washington. This isn't Las Vegas, folks. It spreads. If Congress can hide behind procedure, every other layer of government learns the lesson. If Congress decides the public should not get to see how misconduct allegations were handled against elected officials, what message does that send to state governments? Say like North Carolina. What message does that not send to county commissions? Lower and lower levels. To school boards. To city councils. To agencies. To every taxpayer-funded body that would love nothing more but to handle its own embarrassment. Quietly move on. This is just how bad habits become institutional culture. This is how secrecy becomes normalized. And this is how public trust gets gutted one closed file at a time. And in a constitutional republic, public office is not supposed to be private privilege. It's supposed to be public trust. And that trust only survives when the people can actually see how their government behaves. Not just when government wants to perform accountability, but when accountability becomes uncomfortable. Because let's be honest, the real issue here is not just one vote. It is the mindset behind the vote. It is the arrogance. It is the assumption that the American people are smart enough to pay for the government, obey the government, and vote for the government, but not important enough to know how that government handled misconduct inside its own very walls. That is the insult. That is the double standard. That is the swamp instinct. And when Republicans and Democrats who spend half their lives pretending the other side is an existential threat to the Republic suddenly lock arms, kumbaya, whatever else, to keep the public from seeing records tied to congressional misconduct that ought to be every one of us wonder what exactly what's in those files, what's living in those files, what patterns might be hiding there. What steady parties are they attending? What settlements might raise questions? And what names they would rather never see dragged into public daylight? Because if it was harmless, they wouldn't have buried it like this. If it was nothing, they would not need 357 votes to wall it off from the American people. So in case you missed it, folks, that is the story. Congress had a chance to prove transparency was a principle. Instead, Congress proved transparency is too often just a weapon, used when convenient, ignored when personal, and buried when it threatens the club. And that should make every American furious. Folks, this has been Peter Boykin. I'm your constitutionalist liberty, and this is Go Right with me, Peter Boykin. You can check us out and more on GoRightNews.com and PeterBoykin.com. You can find us on Rumble, Spotify, Spreaker, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Gab, Truth Social, TikTok, Facebook, and X, and some other places too. I don't know. Support independent constitutional journalism and commentary that is not afraid to call out the hypocrisy, no matter what side's doing it. And if you want to support what we're building, you can donate it to Cash App, $ Go Right News. I know most of you probably won't. Gases cost too much. Bills cost too much. But if you want to help out, it's great. Because the truth matters, folks. Transparency matters. And the constitutional republic, the people still have the right to ask what their government is hiding. And that's all I gotta say. Go right, everybody. Have a good day.
Yeah. Go Right News in the building. Constitution in one hand, freedom in the other. Yeah, yeah. New protest, new day. What does the left say? Yeah. They screaming on the timeline louder than a megaphone. When it come to hashtags fly, first shower rate lighting up the sky. One day flag, next day statues, next day something else. Yesterday it's oil and gas, today statues from the past. Bill of Rights on the table like a playbook. Found and wrote it down so the tyrants couldn't shake us. Sides go up, megaphone scream. Half the crowd forgot the thing someone asked what we're marching for. Nobody's really sure anymore. Cable news drama spinning like a carnival ride, but truth don't bend just because somebody cried. You can yell at the sky, but facts don't fold. If liberty matters, then you better let them know. One day this, next day that. Change the slogan, change the hat. Different cause, same display. Everybody shout hooray! They got hashtag. We got history. We got outrage. Oh, we got liberty. Let them know, let them know. We still standing for the rights they trying to overthrow. Let them know, let them know. Constitution in the pocket everywhere we go. Arguing louder every night on TV, but the founders wrote the rules so the people stayed free. Checks and balances moving like a chessboard. Every branch watching power so it never gets greedy. Monday rally stop the wall. Tuesday tear the wall down, y'all. Wednesday chant defend the state. Thursday scream eliminate. Friday slogan something new. Nobody remember number 2. Saturday we block the street. Sunday we protest the tweet. History messy, but the blueprint still stands. It gon' hold paper stronger than the tyrant's demand. You can silence voices, but the truth still grows. So grab the mic and tell the world, let them know. Megaphones and cardboard art. Nobody read the other part. Marches, circles, night and day. Still nobody knows what to say. What are we mad about? We don't know. Who are we yelling at? Let's go! Change the change. Okay, you want the future, then defend the foundation. Something you can trade for a show. Why? Let them know, let them know. We the voice in the republic, watch it grow. Let them know, let them know. No way. Protest all day. Stand tall, stand grow. Lights don't fade when the people carry on. When they change our side. Your freedom, we let it show. Raise your voice and go right. right news in the building. Go right news.